Hey, spiritual extremists, it's Dr. Lloyd-Moffett, Halcyon again. And these two behind me are the founders of the Temple movement. So when William Judge dies, the movement begins to fracture. And one group of of theosophical devotees were in Syracuse, and they were led by Francia Ledoux over my left shoulder and Dr. Dower over my right shoulder. And they were hoping to return to that direct connection with the spiritual masters that had driven theosophy from the beginning. And so they started a movement in Syracuse in the late 1890s, and they begin to look for a place to create a society grounded solely in the universal principles discovered by direct communication with the spiritual masters. That search inevitably ended up on the Central Coast in the place that is now known as Halcyon, where we film. So the Syracuse Temple movement were the origin of the Halcyon movement where we are today. Now, I want to talk again about mysticism because we've looked at poetry as an alternate way to describe it. We've looked at koans and the role they can play. We've looked at paradoxes and the way they can play. We've looked at erotic poetry. This fifth one is one of the most challenging, so follow along here. And it goes something like this. Here we're going to talk about negating language, sometimes called apophatic language to describe the mystical experience. And what it says is that language will tend inevitably to distort the mystical experience. And so it is more fitting, less inexact, less limiting to say what that mystical experience is not, rather than to say what it is. In other words, when we conceptualize the mystical experience and try to put positive affirmations to that, that is, the mystical experience is X, Y, and Z, well, inevitably, that mystical experience is so different from it because language falters. Language necessarily falters when describing that. And so it is less inexact, less distorting to speak of what that experience is not rather than what it is. And so this is how negating language works. You say, well, the mystical experience was kind of like this, X, it was amazing, wonderful, but it wasn't in that it was not that, because that is, whatever description you use, is already applied to things that are lesser, right? So if language is going to falter, how do you sort of counterbalance your positive affirmations? You negate what you say. Now, note that negating language is not negative language. It's not like, oh, I'll never have this experience, or, oh, that God will never be great. But rather what it is taking your positive attempts to describe the mystical experience and then balancing it with the negating ones. So let's look at an example of that. In the Hindu tradition, the Upanishadic sage Yajnavalkya says, there's no better description of Brahman, that is the ultimate source in the universe, than this. It is not this, not that, neti neti. This is the idea that the best way to use language is to use it to negate whatever positive descriptions you say. And you see this a lot in the Orthodox Church. Here's how the Orthodox Christian Church sees it. It says, the God who created everything in the world and continues to guide it is so far beyond our human conception to understand. I mean, Stephen Hawking wrote in A Brief History of Time, which if you got through it, you're better than me, but in the preface he says there's 100 million stars, each with, 100 million billion galaxies, each with a billion stars. I mean, that's unfathomable how big the creator created things. The nearest star is 23 million miles close to us. I mean, think about how big of creation the God of the Hebrew Bible is said to have created. Even in our world, Dinosaurs lived 100 million years ago. I can't even think of last week, let conceptualize 100 million years passing. Even the human person contains 100 million cells, each with 3 billion bits of information. Now, I'm not very good at math, but all this is to say, from the Christian or Jewish or Muslim perspective, the creator of all of that is unfathomable. Whatever created this massive galaxy, it's beyond my mind to understand. Whatever has guided humanity through hundreds of millions of years, whatever guides each of my billion cells, that is too big for my gray matter. But I tend to forget that. I tend to think, oh, I got you, God. I got it. No worries. I can describe what God is. And what orthodoxy says is it's fine to try, but then to balance that out by negating theology, by saying, okay, it is an attempt here, but I'm going to remind myself that whatever words I use were developed in a way that applied to a very different kind of entity, earth humans, than that creator. So listen to Gregory of Nyssa here. He's a 4th century theologian. That which is without quality cannot be measured. The invisible cannot be examined. The incorporeal cannot be weighed. The limitless cannot be compared, and the incomprehensible does not admit to more or less. So if we really want to say that God is unlimited, immaterial, invisible, then we have to mean it. We have to realize that God is beyond our human language. And so all human attempts to describe God are inevitably inexact, inevitably distorting. Language necessarily falters. So you can say God is good, but our conception of good is only grounded in human conceptions of good. And thus, we have to remind ourselves God is not good in the same way that you and I might be good or not good. God is categorically different. And now, for those into philosophy, this is a statement of epistemology, not metaphysics. In other words, God is not the unknowable. That's not who God is in and of itself. But it just says that humans do not have access to the fullness of God. No philosopher, no theologian, no matter how exact she is capable of putting together human language that's adequate for describing God. And so God lies beyond these things. And the danger is we tend to forget this. We tend to think that human language and categories and descriptions have gotten so good that we can understand God. And so we tend to forget this. And it's a little bit, if I can go on my little soap opera here, it's a little bit like, for many years, I really hated teaching freshmen because I felt like freshmen tended to think they knew everything already, but they didn't know what they didn't know. In other words, I think what happens in an education system like a university is not that you get filled up with knowledge. Yes, you learn a bunch of facts over 4 years, but what you come to realize is how little you know, how many things that you had never conceived because you're like, oh, this is how the world works. And then some professor opens your mind to maybe there's X, Y, and Z way of thinking too. Maybe there's a whole different way of conceptualizing. Maybe there are questions that I don't even know that I don't know. Maybe there's ways of conceiving the world that I didn't even conceive of before. And so by the time you get to your senior year, you have come to realize to not be so confident, to be like, maybe there is something I don't quite get, or there's probably some piece of data that I'm not aware of. There's probably some way of understanding it. And what the Orthodox Church is trying to say in Negating Theology is that as you mature spiritually, you realize how deficient human language is in describing this God you claim to believe in, how imperfect our human language is. And Negating Theology is there to remind us about how deficient human language, human reason, and human conceptions are. Now, let me show you how this works. So you might say God is rational because, yes, God is rational. God created reason. But as the creator of reason, God is not rational like you and I are rational. God is beyond reason. So you would say God is rational, but then you negate it by saying God is not rational if the conception of rationality comes from you and my reason. In fact, you might even negate the negating. You say God is not irrational. That would be even better, wouldn't it? But the point is, you have to use these negating techniques to remind you of the deficiency and the limitedness of language. So it's fine to say God is Father. That's revealed in Scripture. But God's not a father like I'm a father or your father is a father. And so you want to check yourself and say God is not a father like my conception of it. And they held that that is more more close to reality, the human attempt to describe that. Now, let's look at one of the great theologians from the 9th century, John of Damascus. He says, God then is infinite and incomprehensible, and all that is comprehensible about him is his infinity and his incomprehensibility. All that we can say cataphatically, positively concerning God does not show forth his nature, but the things that relate to his nature. God does not belong to the class of existing things, not that he has no existence, but that he is above all existing things, nay, even above existence itself. For all the forms of knowledge have to do with what exists. Assuredly, that which is above knowledge must certainly be also above essence, and conversely, that which is above essence will also be above knowledge. Now look at that quote a little bit more. Basically, what it's saying is, look, God does not exist like you and I exist. So whatever terminology we use to describe God that's grounded in human realities and human experiences, it's inevitably going to fall short. God is not just like humans are just. God is the creator of justice and then beyond justice. God is not good like you and I are good. God is the creator of goodness beyond our conception. And so our highest theology has to be checked, if you will, by a apophatic or negating theology. Do your best to try to understand who God is, but then check it with negating theology. And this led to the culmination of this negating theology, this apophatic tradition, in a character known as Dionysius the Areopagite. Now, he's called Dionysius the Areopagite because there was a tradition that he was the one who lived in Athens on the Areopagus, Mars Hill, and the Apostle Paul converted when he visited. Now, it's totally false ascription. This is some 6th century Syrian, but anyhow, so now some people call him Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. But anyhow, he is the pinnacle of negating theology and develop the affirmative statement of who God is that had influence even in the West dramatically. Let's look at that. We therefore say that the universal cause, which is situated beyond the whole universe, is neither matter nor body. There is neither figure nor form, nor quality nor mass. It is not in any place. That defies all apprehension by the senses. Rising higher, we now say that the cause is neither soul nor intelligence. It is neither expressed nor conceived. That is neither likeness nor unlikeness. That it neither remains stationary nor moves. That is neither power nor light. That it neither lives nor is life. That is neither essence nor perpetuity nor time. That it cannot be grasped by the intellect. That is neither science nor truth. Isn't that amazing? God is not truth, nor sovereignty, nor wisdom, nor singularity, nor unity, nor divinity. God is not divine, nor goodness, neither spirit, nor sonship, nor fatherhood, in any sense that we can understand them. That is not anything accessible to our knowledge or to the knowledge of any being. It has nothing to do with non-being, but no more does have anything to do with being. That no one knows its nature. That eludes all reasoning, all nomenclature, all knowing. That is neither darkness nor light, neither error nor truth. And absolutely nothing can be asserted of it, and absolutely nothing can be denied. That when we formulate affirmations and negations applying to realities that are inferior to it, we are not affirming or denying anything about the cause itself, because all affirmation remains on this side of transcendence of him who is divested of everything and stands beyond everything. Whew. What's he saying here? He is going to the extreme to show that whatever precise formulation you think, whatever word applies, none of that applies to God, because God is the creator of words itself, creator of the universe itself. It's so far beyond our human conception and reasoning ability, and we need to be reminded of that. Now, by contrast, if you look at Western approaches as they develop, especially in the medieval and later periods, what you'll see is a rejection of this negating theology. You begin to see proofs. I can prove that God exists using reason. Or you even show images of God the Father, which to orthodoxy is anathema. You do never want to show God the Father, because then that gives people the sense that you grasp God, that it's possible to conceive of God in your mind. And so what Orthodox theology has said is no, let's remind ourselves that God is so far beyond any human attempt to use words, reason, and nomenclature to describe it. And this whole tradition culminates in a guy named Gregory of Palamas, a 14th century theologian, that says, if God is, then I am not. If I am, then God is not. Now, what is he trying to say here? He's trying to say, look, if you're going to use the verb to exist for God, don't use it for me, because I don't exist like God exists. If you want to use the verb to exist for me, don't use it for God, because God and I don't exist in the same way. That is, you always have that differentiation. And so, negating theology, which you see in Hinduism, you see in the Orthodox Christian tradition, you see somewhat in Buddhism and Taoism too. What it tries to do is use human language to play this game of affirming a quality of the source of mysticism and then denying that quality to remind people that human language is deficient. And this is the final of the 5 ways that James uses to really get at the heart of an ineffable description. Now, James doesn't actually break them out as clearly as I'm presenting it, but all he wants to say it is ineffable. But what I've shown here is 5 different techniques that mystics have used over the years to try to use human language to describe the mystical experience when it fundamentally lies beyond human description.